All right, 3, 2. All right, we're live. All right. Ooh.
What's happening?
Oh, it's happening. All right, we're finally here.
Yeah.
All right, we're finally here. All right, we did it. All right, everybody, welcome to Season 2, Episode 3, The Science Behind Fitness. I'm Dave. I'm joined here by my all-the-time co-host, Lebaron Augustini. And for everybody who doesn't know, this is Coach Erik Strassman at Optimal Sport 1315 here on Walnut Street in Center City, Philadelphia.
Nice.
Just want to give a little shout out. Thank you, Jeff, for allowing us the opportunity to.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff, and you all, and everybody here at the Optimal Sport family for giving us the opportunity to use the facilities to talk about fitness and talk about exercise and getting swole. Ooh,
talk about how butter's delicious.
I love butter. So I heard this thing, from What the Health is that if you eat carbs, you won't
get
fat.
If you say What the Health one more time, I wouldn't leave here.
Is that copyright infringement?
No,
I'm going to say what the.
You guys missed it. He said that a lot before he started.
I hate it.
Yeah. Cool.
So basically, there's a lot of myths out there about what fitness is. If I train this way, I'm going to look this way, or if I do this, or whatever.
I put a teaspoon of coconut oil in my coffee every morning.
Oh, lemon juice,
By
cucumber
the way,
water.
that destroys good coffee. Don't do that. Don't do that. I don't care about abs.
Right, yes.
Have no abs. Drink good coffee.
I know you are a coffee connoisseur,
Yeah.
so I just But so basically, how today is going to work out is we're going to go off of Erik, kind of coaching us, telling us about fitness, how he trains, his methodical perception, and he takes more of a like I say the scientific approach to what works for his clients. Does he tell me what do you do? Like what's the science behind how you come up with a workout for an individual? Say I'm a 45-year-old woman. I'm slightly overweight, and I want to get back in shape.
Or if I'm built like a 45-year-old woman, but I'm a 27-year-old man, how do you approach?
Yeah. So would you approach both people the same way? How would you, in first coming up with a plan? When you look at somebody, okay, I want to take them through strength training, I want to do high interval training. There's all these new and fatty type workouts out there. What's your approach?
I think it really comes down to this idea of trying to get somebody to move well. I think that's like first and foremost. You and I were talking about the FMS. It doesn't necessarily have to be an FMS, and if you guys don't know what FMS is, it's just a screening technique. They have 7 different moves. There's all different ways you could be able to screen an individual, but I think maybe the first thing we talk about screening is let's actually talk to them. Let's get an understanding about why do they come to the gym. You got to think about it. Training doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? At all. Like as organisms, right? Like and just as like an animal, right? Like the idea of spending energy doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Unless we're killing.
Yeah, that's it. Like but reward, right?
Yeah.
This whole like risk reward thing and all. So to get somebody in here who you realize has done a great job of just kind of like storing fat and sitting around and not spending that energy.
Focusing on the reward and not the actual
And that's it. And they come in and they're like, you know what? Like I hate training and I hate exercise, but you're going to get me in shape and all. And I'm just like, no, I'm not. There's no chance. It couldn't happen.
Okay.
But if you talk with them, you try to understand why would they want to do this? What is it? What's in it? Then you can start to kind of break down the idea of, well, if they are motivated by a specific aspect, maybe we can take a psychological approach and start trying to reel them in and make them realize that goal, like sort of small victories. If we can just get a little bit closer to that goal each time, keep reminding them that, show them they're making progress, maybe we can get them there. Now, when we talk about the training on that, we have to figure out just how deconditioned they are. And I think a lot of that comes down to...
What do you mean by deconditioned?
Deconditioned. So you take somebody who's pretty much built a body that's designed to sit like on the couch and eat potato chips. Yeah, that's it. Like they're really tight, really tight. The hip flexors and all. Usually they got the posture going forward. They look like this and all. They don't move well. And this isn't to be disrespectful.
How many people that we know? I'm actually starting to get a little behind work in the lab. You know what I mean?
Just to segue off that posture thing, pretty much everybody in the scientific community has this kyphosis, which is actually called a hunchback, from looking at stuff like this all day long. And people in science who are as educated as we are, a lot of people have horrible posture.
Sure. And I think in the scheme of things, like it's mostly because you train your body to do that. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is, well, if you bring them in here and you have them do movements that seem to be important for their everyday life and they can't achieve those movements, like for instance, control themselves as they sit into a chair. If they plop into a chair, if getting out of a chair, they got to rock to get out of it. those are some concerns for me. And I think it's more of a quality of life thing initially. And we want to try to get them in positions where they can do that and have control, and then gradually go into a greater idea of like, all right, cool, now you want to run a marathon. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I don't want to say no, you know?
I think that's a good approach, actually, because I feel like a lot of the times people look at fitness as like, well, I don't want to be an athlete. But I think it's more about you should just want to be healthy and, you know, try to optimize your longevity as far as life is concerned, because health issues pretty much directly impact your lifespan. Aside from genetics, which is the number one determinant of how long you live, what you spend your time doing is going to directly impact how long you stay on this planet.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, you know, if you don't exercise, eat like crap, you're going to increase your chance for cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes. Yep. Like, I know that you're going to bring up metabolic syndrome later on in the show. But
couch potato disease.
Couch potato disease. Yeah, literally. And, you know, I think, what is it? Almost a third of Americans now.
Yeah, actually 30% of our society is at risk for some beginning stages of either type 2 diabetes. 30% is definitely at risk for a metabolic disease. We're close to 40% are considered overweight in this country. Almost a third of Americans are actually obese. So, and that's just something that we have to do culturally. And pretty much.
How about we talk about metabolic syndrome? Talk about how that can be like a predisposition or a genetic predisposition, and then we can actually go into a little bit about, you know, warming up, glycolysis, metabolic pathways, and then we can end maybe a little bit about the genetics of muscle composition, and, you know, go from there.
So let's get some official. Let me get my glossary of terms here.
Metabolic syndrome.
Yeah, pretty much. Metabolic syndrome is a combination of disorders that increase the risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and the hallmarks of metabolic syndrome include high blood pressure, elevated serum triglycerides, fatty acids, reduced serum high-density lipoprotein, HDL cholesterol, insulin resistance, and obesity. So obesity is not necessarily the cause. It's more like a cofactor associated with this more overarching complex disease that we call metabolic syndrome that has these various effects on all of your organ systems.
And I think there was
how many of our clients do you think have this?
I don't know your clientele.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, sure.
On average, if you're talking about the average American, probably about 20%, 25% at minimum.
Well,
in Philadelphia, because we are one of the fattest cities, we're actually, I think, of the top 50 metropolitan areas in the United States, probably like 45.
But we have to stop doing food so well.
Yeah, cheesesteaks,
yeah,
man. I love them cheesesteaks.
I would say in Miami, though, that's like 2% probably. There's a gym on every corner. They're like Starbucks out there. It's
Los Angeles or whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you talk about metabolic syndrome, there was a thing called the Dutch famine, you know, and a little bit of epigenetics rather than just genetics. So just to give a little play into that, epigenetics is how your DNA and how it's read and how it's modified. So basically, you add a couple methyl groups to, say, gene A. That would be for, you know, the breakdown of glycogen or the breakdown of glucose. That would predispose you to metabolic syndrome. So we live in a time of plenty, but there was a time when we were all running around in the savannah in times of scarcity. So when you have,
reindeer?
You know, antelope. I think it's.
I'm sure somebody hunted a reindeer at some part of
the illusion.
Existence.
Yeah, probably the Inuits. The Inuits.
I feel like we would eat reindeer.
Caribou is amazing. You guys ever eat caribou?
Elk.
Wow,
that's what I've had.
I wonder how much your reindeer steak. Continue with your
Sorry.
podcast.
We're going to get so distracted by all the food. So basically what happens is when you're in utero, your mother will kind of give you signals as to how you're going to come out into the world. So basically, if your mom isn't eating a lot, such as in 1944 and 1945, when there was a Dutch famine during World War II because the Germans didn't let the Dutch eat, because obviously they were losing the war, it actually predisposed these children to come out into a world where they actually had plenty of food. So 1950s, 1960s, there was an abundance of food. But their methylation patterns had changed. And in particular, one of the big key loci was IGF-2. And IGF-2
loci is an area of the gene of the genome where a gene is located.
Exactly. Thank you. And then it wasn't necessarily that it mutated the gene, but it was an epigenetic, an over the genetic kind of change. So it changed the way that proteins interacted with this loci and made IGF-2 and IGF-2R. So the protein and its receptor.
So you're saying like children who were born during this specific time period
we're
pretty much being set up with this idea like, hey, you have to be able to be like scarce, you're not going to get as much. All of a sudden they come up like prepped for like the idea that they're going to have less, and then now they got more. And then now the body doesn't know what to do.
Exactly.
Essentially, almost like built an inefficient model.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's kind of like it rewrote your code, or not rewrote your code, but necessarily rewrote the way that your code is read, so that you were going like, oh, so I'm not going to be able to eat all the time. You're going to have to be skinnier. You're going to have to like make do with less. And then when you have more, your body doesn't know what to do with it. It throws it into haywire.
Just to throw out an example, just because there might be some confusions here, none of this is actually thought process.
And I'm trying to be here for some of you guys because I don't get half the stuff at all. So I'm just like, when it seems like it makes sense, I just throw stuff out there.
Even though we're making these examples or we're speaking as if like the body doesn't know what to do, none of this is actually conscious decisions, right? These are things that are going on at the cellular level, but there's an example of how epigenetics plays into this whole thing. A lot of the times we think of genes working as an on and off. Light is on, light is off. But what epigenetics allows you to do is to turn that light switch into a dimmer, right? So genes aren't just present or not present. A lot of the times there's a little bit or a lot of it. And depending on the concentration of that gene, you get different effects. So when something gets methylated, as Dave said, that's a way to decrease the expression or to turn the gene actually off in a lot of cases, especially in cancer.
Sometimes no. Yeah,
sometimes
K4,
no. Right.
Trimethylation actually turns it on.
But these things can affect how much of a protein is
taking a CH3 and throwing it onto an area will make it go, ooh, hide away. Yeah. But if you throw, let's say, an acetate or an acetyl group onto that same area, it'll be like, hey, I'm here.
Got it.
Pick me.
And this is from the gene's perspective as far as the machinery is concerned. This is really based on the polarities associated with these chemical interactions.
Kind of like it lubes up the machine so it can process the low side.
It lubes it up. I'm going to reference acetylation of genes
as lubing genes up. So, I know we covered a little bit of that. So let's go into how you would take a client through a workout.
Cool. And one of the things I want to get into is this. So kind of with the idea what you guys were talking about. So what I've learned a bit is that aerobic fitness is incredibly underrated. So when we talk about this idea of health, if someone came to me and said, hey, I want to get healthy, one of the reasons why I push on heart rate monitors as much as I do is I don't really know like how efficient they are. And I don't know how hard their heart has to work to do everyday function. So if I put someone on the treadmill and I'm just going to go by their perceived rate of exertion, that can mean a whole lot of things.
Right.
And I might look at it and say, I'm going to take it easy on you. We're going to put you on there and you're going to walk at like 5 miles an hour, which by the way is fast.
That's pretty quick. I was going to say that.
But you're going to walk, jog, hold on type sprints. Yeah, I get it. And I'm saying like you can put them on there. You could think to yourself like, well, you're going to get a certain outcome. And they may tell you two different things. They might say, hey, this is really hard. Some people have a weird perception of how difficult things are. But when you do a heart rate monitor, you can see it. You can say, hey, my God, this lady is like 70, and we got her up around 180. Like this is, it's great that she can bring her heart rate up to that level, but depending on her fitness level, I don't know that I want her anywhere near that, So I think in a lot of cases, if we're trying to strengthen someone's heart and we want them to be able to be, in a lot of ways, like more ready for life and have less risk of, say, having a heart attack, that type of thing, I would rather start off in that sort of aerobic cardiovascular area, as well as some of the basic movements, and really work on just having them move well and be able to move for a longer duration in an effective manner, and then start worrying about specializing and doing stuff that they might have seen and go, hey, you wouldn't believe like my grandkids, like they do this looks cool. I mean, every once in a while you have someone, you got them doing box jumps and they're showing that to their grandkids. That's kind of cool. Or
I just envisioned that 7-year-old lady doing a backflip.
Yeah. I was thinking cartwheels.
I have a question for you because when I hear cardiovascular disease, of course, I'm thinking, plaque buildup, inflammation, cytokines. I'm thinking how these events happen on a molecular scale. But from the heart rate aspect, in a normal, healthy adult, how does your ability for your heart rate to go up or down correlate to your fitness level?
It's weird, man. So the two things I've noticed, and again, it's just kind of more from experience than anything else and all. It seems like some individuals have a really hard time ever getting heart rate up. It's weird, man. They get dead tired before the heart rate even gets to an area that looks like it's even effective. And that's interesting because sometimes that means someone doesn't really have the ability to really like get that from their heart. Their heart just really won't even get to that level. Other people, it's funny, they'll come in and sometimes like just really small activities shoot them way beyond, we call it the red zone, because you have these different zones that are on the heart rate monitor. I think it just depends. I mean, it's very specific, as we've kind of gotten into. But I will say this.
Double protein receptors. That's exactly what I was thinking. Because, when somebody's on beta blockers. Yeah. So when you have a client come in that's on beta blockers, you have to be very cognizant of not overexerting their heart rate. Because they're actually suppressing, the heart rate.
I think that's what the pill is supposed to do. Yeah, and it's interesting because with those people, it's kind of frustrating because you don't really have a great way of now you're still kind of back to perceived rate of exertion. And you still are looking at a heart rate monitor if you can because you want to see where they are. But it's weird because it's not like a normal healthy human being or an athlete where you can look at it and you can really tell. And sometimes the difference of 5 points makes a big difference. With them, it's funny because sometimes they'll go like, yo, man, I shouldn't be over 90. Yeah. And you'll look at it and you realize it just doesn't happen. So that's a hard place to be in. And I think then you have to go by other things. How much are they sweating? How difficult does it seem to be? But I think just kind of going back to this idea, if somebody has a lower resting heart rate and a higher heart rate variability, which is something we tend to track, usually there's a correlation with them living longer. And because of that, I've taken that approach with a lot of my clients and said, well, even though they're telling me they want to get stronger, I don't want to neglect that aerobic system because I believe that not only does that recharge other systems, it seems to be more of a regenerating style system. Like if you're in that aerobic zone, you can do active recovery. Yeah. And that's a cool concept there. Hey, you can work out and recover. Most people
define that. So just real quick.
So just my understanding of this is active recovery is a way to basically have someone come in for a workout, get their heart rate up, sweat, right, move, but not work out at a point where their heart rate is very high or that there's a whole lot of output, like demanding, intense output.
As far as weights are concerned.
Could be weights depending on what we do. Most of the time, I like to do it more in like a conditioning, aerobic-y, I hate using cardio terms, but you might put someone on a row machine. Mm-hmm. You might put someone on a spin bike. You might have them jog on a treadmill. You might have them, depending on where they are, use a battle rope. You might have them shadow box. They might be jumping.
Would you combine all those into
and you can kind of throw them all in, depending on what their fitness level is too. As long as you just keep that heart rate, maybe say under 140 for a healthy person. I think that might be a good zone to have it, and just have them do that maybe for 20 minutes or so.
Could you put it into a percentage of exertion, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think it would be like this. You would on a day like that. I think I'd want to be more around a 6 or a 7.
Okay.
So about scale of 1 to 10.
Of where
and just moving, but it should be fun. You should leave that workout feeling a little bit pumped up and good, not exhausted. Okay. So we would look at that as a recovery workout, not say a stimulative workout or even a developmental workout, which is usually you leave and you're like, oh my God, how did I survive that? But again, it seems like those style of workouts have actually been great to do the day before, maybe the day after a hard training day. Mm-hmm. You could do a workout like that, maybe take the next day off, and then do a workout that's maybe around a 7 or 8 tops, and then go into a day that's a 10. And it's cool how you can actually sometimes exercise as a way to be able to get your body more ready for something or to actually recover from a great deal of stress.
I think there might be something to this. So just one of these notes I have here about slow twitch versus fast twitch muscle fibers and how they differ between aerobic exercises and short bursts or high intensity exercises. So for example, it says slow twitch muscles depend on fatty acid oxidation, the TCA cycle activity to support long periods of exercise. So what term oxidative? Let's finish it and let me explain it after. Pretty much, people might have heard this before, that at basal level, your basal metabolic rate, you're burning fat, right? Because how fatty acids are actually long chains of molecules, it takes longer to burn them down, but the energy yield is higher. It's more efficient actually to burn fat as your energy source, but it takes longer to do, right? Yep. So if a dog jumped in here right now, my body would switch to using glycolysis because it's a way to build ATP in a rapid motion in which it would take too long to burn fatty acids.
And your sympathetic nervous system would just turn on, and that's where that whole fight or flight idea comes
right, and that's actually, so that aspect is actually hosted by, norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is adrenaline, kind of potentiate. They turn on these types of enzymes that make you switch into glycolysis versus...
and then overarching, if you have more stimulation, you'd actually get beta fatty acid.
Oxidation. Well, so there's an interesting thing about that because your brain actually uses byproducts of fat molecules. So principally, your brain just uses glucose, and it has no energy stores. So this is why stroke is such a big deal, because once you cut the blood supply to your brain, there's nothing for it to run off of. that blood flow isn't going there, that those glucose molecules aren't going there isn't like brain glycogen chilling. Yeah. So there's no energy there. So stuff starts to die immediately.
They always talk about that today. That's why time is so important.
Right. That's why time is super important in that. But in some cases, though, you can use, hydroxybutyrate? The brain can actually, neurons can use, ketone bodies too.
So that's another thing that I was saying, is that the brain actually uses ketone bodies at a much more efficient rate than any other portion of your body. So a lot of people who are trying to cut weight, like bodybuilders, will put themselves into a pre-ketoacidotic state where they're eating a lot more proteins, eating less carbs, and eating a lot of fats, actually, where the body will actually switch over from using glucose and using ketone.
Right. Just to be clear, this is induced by low blood sugar. Yes. Your body is switching to this method of metabolism because it's deeming that there is not enough glucose to support its functions in this context. Yeah. So in diabetics, this can be a big shit, you can die. But in people that have functioning insulin and insulin receptors, this really isn't an issue, right? Because these short states in which there's low glucose, of course, the body responds and goes, okay, there's low glucose here, we're going to dump a bunch of blood sugar in. So it's more like a cycle in a normal person, whereas somebody that has type 1 diabetes, there's a plummet, and that plummet is actually the problem.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a workout and how the body responds, because we talked about glycolysis and glycogen. We're talking about fatty acids, and let's talk about an hour-long workout. I know you usually train your clients for about an hour. Yep. Let's start off. What do you recommend the average person to work out a day?
Well,
based upon your average person, I'm not saying somebody that's not worked out in 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. Somebody who's an average person that will get on the treadmill and 3 times a week.
Like I want to eat 5,000 calories a day and be 4% body fat. How long should I work out?
You should never leave the gym. You should.
How much energy?
You should literally eat while you're on the treadmill and while you're pumping iron.
Well, let's assume a person is like 5'7", 5'11" or something like that. They're probably like 150 pounds, which is like normal body weight for that height, and they're eating 2,000 calories a day. How long should that person work out on a weekly basis to maintain, if they have a normal balanced diet? Kind of depends, right?
It does, but I actually think I'm going to take an interesting approach on this one and all. And I think 5 to 6 times a week, 20, 30 minutes. I think that's just it, man. I think when it comes down to it, like, I love hearing someone say, man, I would have gotten to the gym, but I realized I was only going to have like 45 minutes. And at that point, like, what's the point, right? Yeah. Or someone's like, I'm only going to have after a little warm up, I only have 25 minutes. So what? Do it. I think I think a lot of times we have decided that after say watching Pumping Iron, that that is actually a thing.
Right.
Like that was it. Like that was the way to go. That was the good old days. And I hear you. Like if you wanted to achieve those results and you had those genetics and you were juicing around that time hard,
right? Those genetics,
all that. I feel like that. Yeah, maybe that would be it. And that was your goal. Your goal was to be the biggest human being on the planet. That's it. But I think for a lot of us,
shout out to HGH.
Yeah, for real. Help us up with that. I hear that stuff's good, But
that's when your heart explodes from ventricular hypertrophy.
But I think you get this idea and people keep saying we were designed to move more, right? A lot was saying that we were designed to be on 4 legs, right? That whole idea. So, so I don't know.
Right, yeah.
But I feel
throwing out
all kinds of stuff. But I'm just you know what?
As an evolutionary guy, by undergrad training, we were literally designed to walk or jog. Jogging with a Y.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
But we're designed to walk or jog over long distances and periods because we were hunter-gatherers. We were scavengers. So we had to go long distances. But people in America are not going to walk 13 miles in a day or jog 13 miles in a day.
Not anymore because we have cars and planes.
So we almost have to speed that process up. And I think, if you think about it, if we were just moving that regularly, that's why when people say, it was crazy. I went to New York, walking around, and I ate like a fat pig. And would you believe it? I didn't gain any weight. And you're like, yeah, I believe it. I mean, if you actually had a heart rate monitor and tracking how many steps you take, 40,000 steps. Well, yeah, let's do 40,000 steps over here. Well, but work and so I feel taking an approach of less is more in some cases on a workout perspective for the day, but more frequency
with consistency is really what you're trying to allude to.
And that's it. Yeah, because I think that it's weird. You can structure your day around that. You can say, all right, well, because I'm exercising, I'm not going to go and eat that sandwich that's going to make me feel more sluggish. You know what I mean? You might pay more attention to things. And I also think too, just your body does well, like picking up skills when you kind of go through levels on it, and you work on that same kind of skill, and work on a couple different skills during the course of the week to get better at it, instead of just like overloading yourself up, feeling like shit, and then next thing you know, like you got 3 or 4 days to try to recover from it, and all like we were talking about, nobody wants to do it again. So I kind of feel like just giving yourself just enough stress and all, like the lowest effective dose, and I'm sure you guys heard that medicine.
Right.
It seems like that tends to work with training, and I think I've actually seen some studies when it came down to working with rowers that they did a study to try to take one group with like low intensity, one group with medium, and one group with high intensity. And it was amazing how after they tracked it during the course of a year, because you usually don't do studies that long, you know it's very expensive. Yeah. But that group who they went with high intensity immediately improved, whereas the other groups were way below it. And then that group tanked. Meanwhile, the medium and low kind of hit the same point, and actually the low seemed to kind of tailor off towards the end, depending on where you are.
I think it's easier to maintain these types of things, especially where they're not ridiculously physically demanding, and you have the time to do something versus dedicating.
And I think we even had it in GC 550 where I forget who it was. I think it was Dr. Haifeng Yang, yeah. Where he said basically, 30 minutes of just even walking on the treadmill at a decently brisk pace, you're already burning fat. So it comes down to...
Just for some reference, Haifeng Yang is a lipid biochemist. He literally studies how your body utilizes free fatty acids and how they correlate to disease.
Specifically cancer and different things like that.
So he's not just like someone's uncle and all who just had the
he was actually the Chinese delivery guy came in and decided to give us a lecture. It was wild. It was pretty
He didn't drop any food off.
He actually made the PowerPoint presentation while he was there.
You guys have like some kind of dim sum set up and all where we can just say that you're going to show up. That's why
I want to get back to a point that you mentioned earlier when you said that you have people that go to Europe and they ate like a pig, but they walk around all the time and they didn't gain any weight, which is a bigger overarching theme that we want to mention. That in regards to weight loss, now don't get me wrong, if you're eating poor quality food on a regular basis, there are going to be other problems associated with your metabolism. But as far as weight loss is concerned, the less calories you take in and the more calories you burn, you're going to lose weight.
Yeah.
Whether it's in Twinkies,
McDonald's, or if it's broccoli and other things like that. Where you kind of get hung up on is those Twinkies and McDonald's are really highly calorically dense. Right. So it's like a ton of feathers or a ton of bricks.
Right.
Well, you're talking about calorically dense and not really nutrient dense either.
Right.
So you're not getting a lot from it.
Right. So there's a big thing too. Like shout out to Chili's, by the way, who has this chocolate chip cookie with like fudge and stuff on it. It's like 1,200 calories. Yeah. It's delicious because 90% of it is butter. Shout out to butter, by the way. But yeah, it's just 90% of it is like fat. And of course, if you're supposed to eat 2,000 calories a day and 1,200 of them just came in your dessert, what type of expenditure do you have to do to maintain that weight? So this is a kind of a problem where
so you're telling me I should eat 5 of those in a day?
I think you should just eat.
Well, if you're Michael Phelps.
Yeah, or Manny Pacquiao.
Or anybody doing the Tour de France. So I have two questions from viewers. So I know that you did diabetes research.
Yes.
I don't know, was it type 1 or type 2?
Type 1.
Okay. So my uncle actually has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, but we have a gene in our family that actually raises blood glucose. So he goes, why does my blood sugar go up when I'm working hard and my sugar is also high? What makes it go high?
If he has type 1 diabetes?
Type 2.
Okay. So if he's got type 2 diabetes, just like the pathology of that disease, type 2 diabetes is on the receiving end of the insulin spectrum, right? So you're producing insulin, but your receptors aren't having the same response, and that's why your blood sugar is high. If you're working out and your blood sugar is high, it's because, like I said, you have normally functioning systems as opposed to type 1 diabetes where you actually have islet destruction, where you have no insulin. In type 2 diabetes, you have insulin, even though some studies or patients that are type 2 for long term do have a decrease in insulin production. You're also breaking down glycogen, right? You break down glycogen, you put glucose in the bloodstream because you're active. And that activity has association with glycogen release and glucose release into the bloodstream. But because you don't have the same response to insulin, that glucose level stays higher than it would normally would if you weren't type 2. So that's what I'm assuming. Of course, like this is just based off current knowledge I have. Email me this question, I'll get back to you.
It's a pretty well-known biochemistry.
And I got a quick question for you guys too. Like, I have a client who's a type 1 diabetic, and one of the things that we've tried to look at is what would be a really good source of energy for her. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with it, because usually when you work with athletes for performance, typically you would just try to pick good quality carbohydrates depending on the sport, and that's usually like a
I
good
think
source.
That goes down to the ketone bodies.
Yeah.
Using proteins, because your body can actually take the building blocks of proteins and fats and turn that into glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis.
Right.
I got it right.
Yeah.
It's not the
And that's like one take right there. Like we didn't stop.
But at that rate, Jay Cutler, he's an American football player. He has type 1 diabetes.
He's also a NASCAR driver that also has type 1 diabetes. He's got a pump, and I didn't know that you burn a shit ton of calories driving.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Yo, you burn it playing chess.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So Robert Sapolsky brought that up. Sapolsky he's trying to figure out like how it is, like he's talking about the difference between us and monkeys and all. One of the things that he was talking about is like a monkey would not understand why it is to be two individuals moving one piece at a time and all, just like competing with each other and all, burning. I think his number was like it was like something crazy, 6,000 calories. And he's saying because apparently like your brain is just like you're thinking at such a high level and all, you can actually sit there on a chest tournament and burn close to 6,000.
So I would refute this statement, and I say this because actual glucose intake is independent of thinking. So when you're sleeping, your brain is burning the same amount of glucose and using the same amount of oxygen as you are. Yeah, I'm telling you, I just read this recently.
I feel like
it's independent of thinking. You could be working on a math problem or taking a shit. Like your brain isn't using any more glucose than normal.
Robert Sapolsky from Stanford, he's taking you on, man.
I think smart people say dumb things all the time. But
the organ that uses the most amount of glucose and ketone bodies and actually burns the most amount
and
of
oxygen.
calories.
I mean, your brain is 5% of your weight, but it uses 20% of your oxygen. Aside from that, the only thing that does more or close to that is your muscles when you're being highly active.
My uncle is type 1. So
he's type 1.
Yeah.
Okay. He's type 1. Again, he's exercising, so glycogen stores are being released. His blood glucose is high because his body is exercising, and he would probably need to
increase the amount of insulin that's probably.
Well, so here's an interesting thing with that. So people that work out or are more athletic over sustained periods of time need less insulin, which is. I am going to say that the reason because of this is because their insulin response actually increases as you're more athletic. So if you take a person this is why weight is so influential on somebody's type 2 diabetes status is because the amount of weight that you have, just the sheer weight or fat percentage, that changes your basal metabolic rate. It also changes the signal transduction associated with insulin and insulin receptor binding. So the same amount of insulin in a fit person who is type 1 diabetic, has a better insulin response, and thus his blood glucose is managed better versus a person that is obese taking insulin. They need more insulin to get the same type of glucose response, or glucose reduction, rather.
So I think we should talk about, again, a workout. Let's say 15 minutes warming up, 15 minutes of doing hard exercise, 15 minutes of, kind of like not a cool down, but kind of like a plateau, and then a cool down. So let's talk about
stretch my glutes.
Yeah. Stretch your glutes right there.
So
I feel like something like back that way a little bit.
Right? Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. Every time I move in that direction, my back is like laid out.
So Eric, should you always warm up before a workout? I know you're talking about this.
Yeah. So we were talking about this. Always. I think to some level there should be some kind of preparation, some kind of way to be able to warm up your joints. Get your body prepped for the activity at hand. Okay. So warm up can be different for everybody, but ideally, in my mind, seeing anybody come in and go sort of 0 to 100, that's cool in a Drake song. But other than that, I don't think it makes any sense.
So I shouldn't go in, throw 4 plates on either side of the bar, and just squat that.
Well, I'm going to say that you might be one of the few human beings that could maybe do that. You and Johnson, you know what I mean? But other than that, I think most of us mortals. I feel like actually trying to warm up the hips a bit, trying to do different types of movements that might show up in that actual exercise or endeavor makes sense. So in other words, when you tell me you're a runner and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go for my long run today. And don't worry, I warmed up, I jogged out of the house and then went straight in the run. I'm thinking you didn't necessarily get the specific muscles that might be involved in stabilizing if they weren't already ready to fire. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the idea of doing a glute bridge to try to get your lazy glutes that have just been sitting this whole time to fire up would make some sense. It's almost like it lets your brain go, hey, that exists. And I think when you get your brain to make that connection, it's easier for it to use it. Otherwise, it's going to go into whatever kind of pattern you just mushed it into. So that's my feeling on it. Is I feel like if you're going to do a warm-up, get the heart rate up. I like a good sweaty warm-up if you can get it, but let's say you don't have all that kind of time to it.
Maybe get your second wind in your workout.
And who's to say, too, that you can't, like, get the weight on the bar, start doing some air squats, right? Then put the bar on your shoulder, get a squat going. Then maybe do some running in place. Then maybe get the high knees going. Then go in there and put, like, 30% on tops. Get a couple sets on those. Then maybe go in there and do some push-ups. Then maybe do a carry, right?
So basically, everything you've just said is a dynamic type of warm-up.
Yes.
So are you of the belief that you should do static stretching after workout? Could you use it before workout? How do you feel about static
I appreciate you
stretching?
asking that.
I know a lot of
I've
things.
heard various things on this from different people in different positions.
Great coaches will often have a strategy for how it is you can prepare a muscle for an activity, right? That's usually how it works out. Just saying that you don't static stretch before a workout is a bad idea. Just like I heard a physical therapist say, no man over the age of 40 should go and do push-ups, right? He said,
I've heard that.
now granted, he was a physical therapist and he's seeing people come in at the worst of the worst. Shoulders destroyed, right? Look what I'm doing real quick right here. You see me pinch these shoulders back? That took years. I didn't even know that was an issue for me. So if you can't do this and then open up the chest, you might be at risk. If your push-up looks like this, maybe you shouldn't do it. You have
my
no
push-up
core
looks
stability.
like this.
Yeah.
My push-up looks like right.
I think that's the thing. But I would say that static stretching, if you have a muscle that's drastically overactive, and honestly overactive where it's more like synergistically dominant, it's doing more work for something. For instance, if you knew your pecs weren't working and there was a way to actually stretch your triceps so your pecs can do more work in a bench press, that might be an advantage. We might want to do that, But at the same time, probably a safer way to do this would be more of like an active kind of motion, something like this, and then actually going into maybe a motion that looks a bit like what you're going to do. So a lot of times, let's say it was a pushing motion, actually looking like the weirdo, pinching the shoulders back with the bands, pulling, then pushing, trying to warm them up. Those are the things I think that would apply better. Even rotations and things like that forces like the idea that your lower, middle, and upper half all have to work together. It seems like